We should note that earlier today, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said in two different radio interviews that he did not know Lev Parnas or know about the alleged surveillance of U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch. He did say more than 2 days now after these initial messages became public that he would investigate the claim. The House voted to impeach Donald Trump 1 month ago. The trial is now 3 days away. Tonight, we learned the makeup of Trump's defense team, and it is made up in part of people the president watches defend him on Fox News. White House counsel Pat Cipollone and his personal attorney Jay Sekulow will lead the team. Then it's back to the Clinton impeachment with former independent counsel Ken Starr and his successor Robert Ray. Defense lawyer Alan Dershowitz rounds out the made-for-television element of the team. More on him and Mr. Starr in just a moment. They are joined by Eric Hirschman, Miami defense lawyer Jane Raskin, who was part of the White House team handling the Mueller investigation, as well as former Florida Attorney General and longtime Trump supporter Pam Bondi. By the way, Bondi has apparently already encountered Lev Parnas. Earlier today, Parnas' attorney posted this photo as a convenience on Twitter. Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz are without a doubt the highest profile members of the team. Between them, they have appeared on Fox News some 350 times in the past year. When Starr was leading the drive to prosecute Bill Clinton, note future Justice Kavanaugh there to the right, Trump was outspoken in his criticism of his work. He wasn't always a fan, it seems.
I think Ken Starr is a lunatic. I really think that Ken Starr is a disaster. I hated the way the president handled it. It was a long and terrible process. I really think that Ken Starr was terrible.
Earlier on this network, Senator Patrick Leahy said this about the addition of Ken Starr to the defense team.
I found it interesting that they're picking Ken Starr. I mean, you know, on your own network, Donald Trump called him a lunatic when he was going after Bill Clinton. I'm looking at it as a former prosecutor, as a lawyer. I see Ken Starr, a man who pushed the weakest impeachment case, certainly in my lifetime, and now he's up here to defend the strongest impeachment case in my lifetime. Well, that's their choice, but it's a weird choice.
We move on now to Mr. Dershowitz. He has a history of defending controversial figures, including but not limited to O.J. Simpson, who he helped to beat a double murder charge. Both he and Starr have represented convicted sex offender and accused child sex trafficker, the late Jeffrey Epstein, who also had dealings with Donald Trump. This evening, Dershowitz spoke with our colleague Ari Melber by Skype and seemed to be trying to distance himself from his role on Trump's legal dream team.
I will not be involved in the factual aspects of the case. My sole responsibility is to analyze and present the constitutional arguments against impeachment. I am not somebody who is strategizing with his legal team. I won't be involved in the decision whether to call witnesses. I am doing it as a lawyer who is not in a lawyer-client relationship with anybody. My specialized role is to present the constitutional argument, the same argument I would present if Hillary Clinton had been elected and she were being impeached.
Meanwhile, back at the White House today, the president was careful to adhere to business as usual, welcoming the LSU Tigers to celebrate their national championship. After the team awarded him with a jersey with a 45 on it, the president threw this in.
We'll take pictures behind the Resolute desk. It's been there a long time. A lot of presidents, some good, some not so good. But you got a good one now, even though they're trying to impeach the son of a bitch. Can you believe that?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.